Hello and welcome to another episode of the Traxion podcast. I'm your host for this particular episode, Tom, and joining us today is someone who is the official Formula One esports commentator for the Challenger Series and someone who isn't that. Welcome, Justin and John.
Thank you.
How are you both doing?
Happy to be here.
All right,
Yeah,
so
good,
today
thanks.
we're going to talk... Oh, good. That's great. Today we're going to talk about hidden gems, and more specifically hidden gems within the racing game genre. So I'm going to throw John a curveball straight away and ask, to you, what is a hidden gem? How would you define a hidden gem?
A hidden gem for me is a game that not enough people discovered relative to how good the game is. So it's a game that was maybe underappreciated or forgotten about or missed out that some people have come back to in the future, and turns out it's actually a really good game. So what I'm looking for here is a high quality game that maybe didn't get the sales it deserved due to its quality and just whatever reason. So that's kind of how I would describe it.
Right, interesting. I think I would agree with that. But Justin, do you think they have to be an old game or can they be a recent game? Do you have an opinion on the age of a hidden gem?
I think as if it's older, then it could have been popular at the time, and then kind of fallen off, as John said, kind of forgotten about a little bit. But yeah, you could have a modern hidden gem. It just has to have like a really low player base, or just isn't really well known, or something like that. But I would say, at this point, probably most of them are old games. It's hard to, especially if you follow Traxion, you're going to know about every racing game that comes out. There's not going to be any hidden gems, but the older games for sure. And especially, with kids that didn't grow up putting CDs into their consoles and stuff like that, they will be especially hidden for them.
Right. So I hope today in this episode, and we all do that, you'll discover, if you're listening or watching on YouTube, some games that you might not have heard of before that are really quite good, underappreciated in the racing game space. But also there might be some games that you'd completely forgotten about and it jogs your memory and you go, oh, yeah, I did see a demo for that or a video for that. Or maybe I've even played it and completely forgotten about it. And so that's kind of why we're doing this whole topic for this podcast episode in particular. And I think what we'll do is something slightly different. So we're each going to talk about a couple of games each. I'll lead with the first one, if that's okay. But when I say the name of the game, I'd like Justin and John to live Google the game, see if they can find it. And also, I think it might help if they see images of the game, if it brings up some memories, or if they've never heard of it, then they get some instant reaction goodness. And then we'll each do that for each of our games that we sort of introduce. If you're listening at home on the audio version of the podcast, just pause, you can play along. Or if you go to the TraxionGG website on the podcast post, we'll put some images of each game that we mentioned in depth on there too. So without further ado, here's my first hidden gem. Are you ready?
Ready.
Who knows?
Ready, John? All right, yeah, good. Right, now this one's very difficult. I get very confused with the name of it. So not Automobilista or Automobilista 2, which is a current game,
Right.
but I'm going to have to read my notes, Modelista.
Modelista. Yes.
Modelista. Stick that in
I
your
have
Google
heard of
pipes.
this. I have heard
This
of
was
this.
from 2002, initially on the PlayStation 2, then came a year later to the OG Xbox and the GameCube, and it was by Capcom. Also, they used the base of this game to do like a semi-sequel-ish, but then within a year, this was effectively kind of the last game that Capcom ever did with cars in it. So, very interesting aesthetic. So I don't know if you guys can see it.
Am I right in saying, Tom, that this game is as much about kind of customization and developing your own kind of styles and stuff like that?
Right.
It looks interesting.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a weird game. It's a Japanese game. And as you can both see now, what do you think to the style? It's basically shell-shaded. It looks like a cartoon or an anime, but with cars.
I've played it before. I didn't buy it though. I rented it back when
good
it
old
came
rentals.
out. And I love the style. I absolutely love the style of it. I think it looks fantastic. In fact, it still looks fantastic looking at it today because it's stylized, because it's got that almost comic book nature to it. Yeah, it's very comic booky, especially with the stuff that comes, like when you start drifting, it's like Mario Kart where you get the waves coming off your wheels as you're drifting. And I remember the customization was really good too. I remember being disappointed by the handling. I don't remember why. I don't remember why exactly, because this was now almost 20 years ago at this point. So it was a long time ago that I'm weirdly not much of a retro gamer. If something gets remastered, I'm interested, but I'm not one to go boot up a PS1 or PS2 console or install an emulator or something like that. For whatever reason, that sort of thing just doesn't appeal to me. But I remember really, really just being disappointed with the handling on this one. I was so hyped for it.
Yeah, because I think the aesthetic is incredible. And as you say, it's timeless because it's cel-shaded. Easy for me to say that. I always struggle with that. And it sort of looks like the cartoon, and that's great. It's got the really amazing, when you're going really quick as well, you can sort of see the wind. They have like the white lines. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to describe there. And the letdown was the gameplay. And unfortunately, this is a great example of how the gameplay is king, and then you need to try and build a good game around it. This was sort of style over substance, which is a shame. But it's a hidden gem because I don't think many people bought it, played it, and I feel like there's potential to bring it back with some nice physics. I mean, it'll never happen. Capcom's out of the game. They own the license probably, but someone could do a similar style of game. And I think, John, even though it's very different, we've seen like a renaissance of some of the more cutesy stylized games. Like I think you've been playing Art of Rally recently. It's very different to this, but it shows that there's scope for some different looks.
Absolutely. I think that it's something I've never really considered before is designing a game that might have looked really modern and really up to date at the time, but because of the style they've picked, it's actually timeless, and people would choose to design a game like that now, even with modern capabilities of design. I've never really thought about it, but I wonder if that's inspiration for some, new game makers to think, okay, if these graphics are going to look rubbish in 10 years or 20 years, I mean, we all think, how could these get any better? But they will. You undoubtedly will.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe a way around that, trying to go for something that's a little bit more of a style of its time and has a little bit more of that cartoony feel to it, especially if it's like an arcade game, because then you're going to make it more timeless, as you guys have been saying. I think it looks awesome. It kind of gives me Gran Turismo vibes. Maybe that's just the year. But yeah, I think it's really, really nice. I love that kind of anime style as well. I think a lot of the cars in this game are like Japanese cars, and it's a lot about tuning and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. Actually, I've got an interesting point about that. Because to try and make it successful in America, and you might appreciate this, Justin, they added one oval track and the Dodge Viper to the cover of the game.
Unfortunately, that didn't work. Yeah, no, it did not work. But yeah, the thing is, it was very Initial D in the lineup of cars, with like Evos and RX-7s and Silvias and the sort of stuff that you would expect to see in Initial D. And it made it really, really good. I really, really enjoyed the car selection and that sort of stuff. And it really reminds me, the cell shading, the look of it, it reminds me a lot of Borderlands, the looter shooter.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which is also cel-shaded, was recently remastered for 4K, I think, or something along those lines. 4K textures. And it looks incredible. And I don't think too much effort went into it, honestly. So yeah, I think a real case can be made. And I don't think it needs much in terms of the gameplay. I think it just needs to be arcade. Like, I wouldn't try to make it work with a wheel. I would make it controller only. And I would make it handle very, I don't know, really arcadey, like way more grip than taking way more speed through corners than you should be able to. But otherwise, just leave it unchanged. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I remember liking the music. The menu system was even really good. Everything about it. The problem was, as soon as it said go, it's like, oh, no.
Yeah, so it wasn't kind of arcadey to drive with. It was almost trying to be a Gran Turismo.
Yes, it was.
Which you both mentioned, and which is correct. So it had like the car upgrades. One thing it had better than Gran Turismo was it had a lot more visual upgrades to the car in terms of like spoilers and wings and splitters, kind of like a Need for Speed. But it also had a real-life Toge road that they use, which is weird. So they actually made a real road that's in Japan you can drive around. Lots of fictional stuff. But there was also Suzuka in there, the actual track.
That sounds
and so really, it was just tonally a bit weird with that. But I just love the sort of vibe. So anyway, that's the first one. Auto Modelista, not Mobilista.
It's two words.
Let's not get that. It's
2
words.
Space Modelista. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank God for autocorrect and Google's search suggestions. You can find it there. But anyway, that's the first one. So now I'm going to switch across to someone else's. Going to have a little ramble. I'm going to get my device ready here, and I'm going to go Justin. I think you might
Okay.
have a hidden gem for us that we've neither of us heard of. We'll find out soon. What is it?
I've actually got one that's kind of related to that loosely. So I'm actually going to go with that since that's a nice segue. And when I say loosely, I mean mainly the car lineup actually is very similar in this game. And it is Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero. Specifically, now extreme is spelled without the E at the start. So it's Tokyo space, the letter X, TREME.
I wonder why anyone would just use the letter X in a word instead of the proper spelling. I mean, that's such a crazy idea.
It came out in 2001. Yours came out in 2002, which I think shows our formative years.
Yeah.
I think it really reveals our age right there, Tom. But yeah, it came out in 2001. I was 16 at the time. I was really into PC gaming at the time. I think that's right around the time I was getting into Unreal Tournament and Diablo 2 specifically. And so like I was really heavily into my PC gaming. No, not at all. But this was one of the few games that kept me playing on console. It was one of the things that kept me coming back because it wasn't available on PC. It was I want to say a PS2 exclusive. I don't think it was available on any other consoles. Yeah. But yeah, specifically Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero. I've played other Tokyo Extreme Racer games, but Zero was the one that captured me the most. It really felt like the highway racing version of Gran Turismo. If you're because Gran Turismo. Yeah, it's not just street; it's all on highways in particular.
Right.
Interesting. So it's very high speed. So it's one of those things like rolling starts at 100 kph. And it's 1v1 battles for the most part. It's been so long since I played it, but yeah, it's almost entirely 1v1, and traffic is huge. Obviously, traffic is a big part of it. You only drive with traffic, though, if I remember correctly. You can't drive into oncoming traffic, so it's not like a Burnout game or a Need for Speed Hot Pursuit or something like that. You're very limited to just the correct side of the road, which is the left side. But it's through Tokyo, so you get these cityscapes and these lit up bridges, and it's always at night. I mean, I don't think it's ever during the daytime.
You've got to do your illegal activities under the cloak of darkness.
Exactly. But it's got the upgrade kind of system that Gran Turismo has. First of
interesting.
So it's got that kind of customized, and it's got that great career mode, that feeling of progression where you start off with some terrible, woeful, sad car that's just absolutely terrible, and you upgrade it just because you want to get rid of it faster. Essentially, you want to just get the thing faster, upgrade it, and then replace it and never look at it ever again. And it's very similar to Gran Turismo in that sort of respect, I think.
Cool.
But it was really heavy as well in terms of the physics. The cars were pretty heavy feeling, moving from lane to lane and stuff like that. But yeah, really high speed. I think there was a Viper in that one too, which makes me wonder if Japan, or Japan has some sort of like obsession with the Dodge Viper, which is cool with me. It's like a top 5 car for me. It's one of my favorite cars of all time. So
I'm actually looking at it. It says there's 165 cars in the game. That's a huge car list. I don't think they're official. I think it's unofficial versions. I sound like an expert. Thank you, Google. But have you played it before? I have not played it before. No, I love the fact there's an NSX on the front cover. You know what it reminds me of, though? Talking about that kind of era, and it's called Tokyo Extreme Racer, which instantly made me think of city driving and racing. Yeah. And it reminds me of a game I used to play called London Racer. I think it was London Racer.
Oh, I've heard of that.
It's probably the equivalent of what I played when I was younger. But basically, with London Racer, it was a similar kind of thing. You start in a rubbish little car, maybe a Mini, which isn't rubbish, but it was a really rubbish in terms of speed compared to everything else. And I think you could develop your way through. I can't perfectly remember it, but it kind of gave me the similar vibes. You only ever raced around the streets of London, and I loved that game when I was younger.
I don't think I've actually played London Racer, weirdly. But yeah, that is sort of like the British Tokyo Extreme Racer.
We should do a swap, Justin.
Yeah,
somehow not as cool, though, is it?
Well, so speaking of, Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero is so cool that it's actually being revived, not by the people that made the game, which was it was like Crave, I think it was. They made a number of games that I really liked.
Japanese. publish house?
Genki.
It wasn't like
it was also it was developed by
Oh.
Genki as well. Yeah. So yeah, another very popular Japanese in the PS1, PS2 era developer. But so there's something called the Shutoku Revival Project. Shutoku Revival Project.
I understand why you had to read that out now from your computer screen, because that is not easy to pronounce.
And it's got a Patreon that you can join, and essentially it's a very in-depth set of mods for Assetto Corsa. And it I don't actually own it. I only learned about it very recently because of an Empty Box video. Empty Box is like an old school iRacing YouTuber that's been around for years and years and years, and went on like a hiatus for a while, and now he's back, and he did a video on Shutoku Revival Project, and it just looks absolutely gorgeous. Shutoku Revival Project. Good. And it looks gorgeous, just like Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero did, by the way. Also, Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero games have some of the best intro videos of all time, because back in the day, PS1, PS2 era, it was all about that intro video.
So
you pop
important.
the disc in, exactly, and you get the CGI cinematic that plays, and it was
like the game.
It gets exactly. It looked nothing like the game, and in fact, the pre-rendered scene at the beginning of Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero, I think somebody's done like a 4K AI upscale on it, and it still looks like crap compared to like Forza Horizon 4 in-game graphics. If we're honest, like but at the time, it was absolutely gorgeous, and it was one of the big selling points of it. It also just had a great kind of like, there was this music that would play when you would challenge a rival by flashing your headlights at him and stuff. You know what I mean? Like it really set the mood really, really well. And there's actually a Corvette, by the way, I believe, in the opening cinematic for Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero, like a modified West Corvette. West is like a modification company here in the US.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
There's a West modified Corvette, C5 Corvette, I believe, with a huge wing. But yeah, if you've never heard of Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero, just watch the opening cinematic later on. It's cool. It's well worth it. But what I'd like to do is actually try out Shutoku Revival Project at some point in the near future, because it sounds cool.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hope they get their backing to do that, and it's all legal with the Assetto Corsa engine, right? But that's a really good one. So we've got 2 Japanese themed games so far, and just very quickly, both, especially yours, Justin, reminds me of a chap called Smokey Nagata. Now, if you've not heard of him, if you're listening to the podcast, listen to him another time. He did Tune Japan. He still does a company that do Tune Supras and Skylines and stuff. And he drove at night on the streets of Tokyo at high speed. And in fact, he came to the UK and got arrested for doing 200 miles an hour on our motorways. Very famous story, so check it out. Well worth a watch. But anyway, moving away from the Japanese theme, maybe not, we'll find out. John Munro, would you like to enlighten us all with a hidden gem, please?
I am going to save my best hidden gem for later. I'm going to go with my second vote at the moment.
So this is John's second best hidden gem.
Yeah, I've already ruined it for this particular game. What did you guys say your years were? I think the first game was, what was Automodelista?
02.
That was what year? 02. And then the second one was 01.
01, yeah.
Yeah, and you guys were saying it was showing your age.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, my game is from 2002. And
here we go.
It is
this is obviously
a game
golden era for racing games.
I've spoken to Tom about this game. I don't know if I've spoken to you about this, Justin. But some of you you're probably more likely to have played this game if you were, I guess, my age growing up. It was the perfect game for like a young racing fan to get into. And that's a game called Total Immersion Racing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, indeed.
I don't need to Google that one. I'm on board.
I just typed in total, and it was the first result. But no, it's not immediately ringing a bell for me.
So I think I got this game really cheap back in the day as well. Like I must have been like, well, how old was I? 6 when this game came out, and I remember it was cheap even when it was released. I mean, I know video games have gone up in price hugely in the recent years, but this was a cheap game, and I remember didn't really have any expectations for it. Even as an excited 6-year-old who loved racing games, I wasn't expecting this to be amazing, but I got so much time out of this game. Basically, it's a GT endurance style racing game. Where you have a bunch of different classes and you can work your way up through the career mode and sign for different teams, right? And you think that's for a game of 2002 that felt like relatively low budget. It was not like it's Gran Turismo or something like this or Need for Speed.
Yeah.
It felt like it had a lot of depth to it. And the best thing about this game is the car list. I think the first GT class, and I might get this wrong in terms of my facts here, but the first GT class contained like a BMW M3 race car. It contained a Noble M12 GTO. It contained a Quaif, which is a really rare racing car that you would have seen in British GT. Yeah, they make gearboxes now, Quaif, and they always did make gearboxes, but they built a car, which was a GT car. And then as you move up through the classes, you get into GTS, which was, I think, the equivalent of what GT1 was in real life. So you have the McLaren F1 long tail, you have a Centura, which is just amazing. I think you had the front engine Panos Esperante as well.
That's another obscure one there, John.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's why it's so good, because these GT cars are absolutely magic cars that I'd love to have them redone in a modern game, but this game had it, and the fictional circuits on the game were incredible as well. So many classics that I would just love to revisit.
Were they all fictional tracks? Or were there some real tracks as well?
I think there were some real ones in there as well, because Rockingham's in there, so there were a few real ones, and Silverstone, I believe, as well. But there were a bunch of fictional ones as well, which were just absolutely amazing. I also should mention they had an LMP class too, with your Audi R8, your Bentley Speed 8, basically like the kind of early 2000s Le Mans era, late 90s, which I've talked about too many times on these podcasts because it was one of my favorite years of racing. But yeah, that game was phenomenal, and it was actually the game I learned to do manual gears on a keyboard at the time. It's when I used to play it. And it drove really nicely on the keyboard for the time. I'm not going to play it again now because I don't want to ruin that, stigma.
I know you mean.
But it was amazing, great fun.
Justin, have you played this before or heard of it? Or
it's not jogging. It's not jogging my memory immediately.
Yeah, it was pretty obscure. I wonder if it was only PAL release, but
I may have played it at a friend's house or something like that. I probably didn't rent it or own it, but I may have played it at a friend's house at some point potentially.
They had some cool hidden cars developed.
As well. It was UK developed as well, by the way. So yeah, it may have been more prominent in the UK than in the US.
Yeah, because I think the Centura and the Quaif were British GT specific cars.
I looked up the Quaif GT1, by the way, and it is a good-looking car. You're right. It's almost like a XJ220 modernized a little bit. You know what I mean? It's got the kind of long oval. It's front wheel.
Yeah.
Four-wheel drive.
Four-wheel. It's four-wheel
Which is still
drive.
weird.
That's right. Yeah. Wasn't the XJ220 initially planned to be four-wheel drive? Did somebody defect from Jaguar to Quaif to make that car? Because it almost seems like an XJ220 or what the XJ was supposed to be.
They kind of combined a few cars from different classes into the same thing. So they had the DTM Audi TT in there as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I saw that. There's like an there's like a BMW I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, they did a collection of different things, and they also had some amazing unlockable cars. So in the LMP class, for example, there was the Panos LMP as well. So you had the front-engined Panos, which was such a famous car, beautiful car, amazing in video games. They also had an unlockable. They had a Lister Storm LMP car, which was unlockable. They had a Pillbeam LMP. And they also had a single-seater once you got to the end of career mode. Sorry if I've spoiled anyone who's been playing that game recently.
I never knew that.
Amazing stuff. Yeah. So much.
What sort of single-seater was it?
It was just I think it was kind of based on a kart kind of car at the time.
Right.
It felt like the kind of car that would be like a demo car for people to come and try and experience Formula One, but not really Formula One, if that makes sense. I might be wrong on that, but I think it was kind of based loosely on kart era. But that game was just so much fun. It actually came out on PC, PS2, and Xbox as well. So it was. I tried it on the PC when I was younger, but it clearly got out there, and I'm sure some of you watching this, I'm sure someone at least have played this game and will know what I'm talking about. But
maybe it's just me and you, John.
Maybe not.
I picked it up cheap on the PlayStation 2 back in the day, and it was one of those where I didn't get it when it was new. I got it used from a shop, for £2. I had some trading credit. Oh, well, this has got cars in it, and I actually quite enjoyed it. Yeah, because I remember the Bentley Le Mans car, the Audi DTM car. They were really cool. I seem to remember some track. It was either Suzuka or it was like it, but not quite. That sticks in my brain in this for this game. But yeah, an interesting one, very obscure, and I would love a modern day sort of GT class car racing game that isn't just like GT3 and GT4, but has some of the classic stuff and some of the Le Mans stuff,
classics,
all of it mixed in. Yeah, that'd be really cool. I mean, actually, we've got an article on the TraxionGG website of what racing games we'd like to see, and in that, someone suggested the BPR series, which was just before FIA GT. And this game, I don't think it has those cars, but it's similar and close, and
It was a bit
It's of
off.
that
I think
era.
this game came out just after.
Yeah.
Yeah, the BPR series were the kind of, I guess, the first models of any. When the manufacturers didn't really know how to make the most of GT1 Rex, and there was all these cars that were really quite bad, but so exciting and unique and fast as well because it had so much power. So no, it was good. Really good era.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've got 2 sort of Japanese themed picks and one that's very British as well. So I'm going to move things on to something that's Italian. So we're getting all the... Maybe in the past, people used to do games that were sort of region-specific. I don't know. Now, this game is so obscure that I'd like to both do a very quick Google, but then we'll just sort of discuss it because there's not much out there. There isn't... The Wikipedia entry for the game has like 2 sentences, and the sequel doesn't have a Wikipedia entry. All right? And it's not that old. It's not that old. It's from 2009. And it was called Superstars V8 Racing. So have a quick Google, and then we'll have a quick discussion about it. But this is by Milestone, the Italian developer who now does the official MotoGP games, the official like Supercross and MXGP games.
Oh, we know them well at Traxion.
Yeah, we know them well. We've got reviews and articles and videos for all these games. We've also got a Hot Wheels branded game coming out later this year. But before all that, they did this little obscure touring car game, which focused on the Superstars V8 series, which was an Italian touring car series at the time, which was trying to sort of ape DTM, but with sort of less success and less budget. So have either of you heard of this or played this game? John's smiling.
No.
John,
yes, I have.
Not even a little.
That was like the great thing about that is that was an instant. Like I would have remembered that game, and you've just unearthed it for me. I bought this game as the same. If you remember, if you listened to the Formula One podcast last week, I talked about this particular game shop I went to in my local city, Inverness, when I was younger, and I remember picking up this game, Superstars V8 Racing, along with 3 other racing games on one of these buy 4 games for 15 quid or something. You know, the games that have just been thrown in the bin and no one wants.
Which is the perfect
and I took it home. And I specifically remember a lot of the tracks on it. I knew a little bit from like the Superbike games and stuff. They had stuff like Portimao was on it. They had Vallelunga, I'm pretty sure, Misano, all these kind of places. And I remember specifically liking the game because the cars were mega. The tracks were a lot of tracks I'd never driven before in other games because they're quite obscure Italian tracks a lot of the time. But also it felt like a car version of the Superbike game in that era to me, which I did not know it was Milestone. Yeah. So it's funny how that kind of ties in the future. But that was a cool game. The cars were magic, and they just kind of disappeared, and they're so obscure. So I love that pick.
Yeah. Maybe one day I'll go back and revisit it and then fill in the Wikipedia entry for it. I don't know. But
is it like V8 Supercars from Australia, but 10 years ago?
Yes,
basically.
That's a better. Yes, right. They were trying to combine DTM and V8 Supercars into one Italian series, and so yes, good point to raise that. It was a real life series, and this is an officially licensed game.
So Germany plus Australia equals Italy. I did not know that. I did not know that.
I learned that in school, Justin. It's just simple maths, really.
Right.
Which is why a lot of the tracks are Italian, because it's kind of an Italian series. But in real life, they tried to expand the popularity. So Kyle is in there in South Africa as well. They actually went there. And Portimao, which you mentioned. So there's actually some interesting tracks. And the key was, of the time, with a controller, I've got to stipulate that, the handling of the cars was very good. So the game itself was quite basic, but the gameplay was good. And the sequel added these cool wet track effects where it almost looked like there was a dry line. You know, if it had rained and then worn out. Now, the physics of the game didn't replicate that at all, right? But it looked really good in terms of wet weather on the track. And I was like, wow, this is the future. What also made it a bit more obscure, especially for you, Justin, was I think only the sequel was available in America, and it was only as a download, whereas in Europe it was available physically. We had 2 games, but even then it wasn't popular over here. It was
I would imagine as well. It probably looked like a knockoff NASCAR game to the American audience. You know what I mean? They're like, we already have a huge V8 racing series, so why would we need this one? So I would imagine easily overlooked. And again, a lot of renting happened for me with the PS1 and PS2 era,
and you can't rent a download.
And that one doesn't really seem like one that would be available to rent in the store anyway.
No. So
For me, it was the kind of game that, so like I agree with you, Tom. I think the driving physics were really good in it for its time with a controller. I remember specifically thinking this, and again, it's another like era of car where I'd love to drive those in a really modern sim and see what the cars felt like.
Right.
I think the issue for me, from memory, that I didn't play it for too long because it didn't really have any depth to it. I don't think
there's nothing to it.
Career there was just it was just like you do a bit of racing against some AI. It's pretty cool, but it didn't feel like I was part of a story or anything, which is kind of why I went off it. But I did get a few good days out of it.
Yeah, exactly. It was affordable as well. I don't think it was ever full price from new. And the sad thing is that series in real life folded as well a few years after, so you don't hear about it anymore. Also, it was an officially licensed game of the series, so it had the drivers and the tracks and the cars, except the Chevrolet and the Chrysler cars, they didn't have the license for. And so I'm going to check my notes here. They were called the Cluster and the Barricade.
Yes.
Which was hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
There was some good drivers, right? There was some reasonably, I mean, there was a lot of obscure Italian touring car drivers and people that we necessarily wouldn't have heard of much, but I think there was a few big names in there.
Ex-Formula 1 drivers, Gianni Morbidelli, who was he drove for Sauber once. He drove the series at the time. From a touring car side, Fabrizio Giovanardi was in it for a bit, although not in these games. Johnny Herbert drove in a Maserati in it for one season. Yeah, there's some random people did appear. Oh, Vitantonio Liuzzi as well. But again, not in this game. So sort of, if you finished Formula 1 for a bit, you sort of went to drive for this series for a year a bit and messed around in the midfield. Yeah, and final point I guess I'd say on this is if you're into your achievements or trophies, you could get the Platinum Trophy or PlayStation, all the achievements on Xbox side within about 2-3 hours. And almost I felt like it was a marketing exercise. All right, we've got this budget game for this series no one cares about, but there are people that love the achievements and trophies. Let's make it really easy.
It's true.
Yeah. So there was that. So cool. That was that one. So we've got 4 games down. Hopefully people listening have heard of it, or if not, these games they've searched around. So it's on to you, Justin. Do you have another hidden gem for us? And is it Japanese?
Nope, it's not Japanese this time. Actually, I know. I'm pretty confident it's not Japanese. I don't actually know. I'll look it up. I'll look it up. But I can tell you that it's the first one not from the 2000s. Because so far
that's good.
We're batting 1,000 when it comes to picking games between 2000 and 2009. So I'm not going to deviate far from that decade, though. Mine, my second one is from 1999. Specifically June of 1999. So yeah, it's only just inside the 90s by about 6 months or so. But it is Driver 1. So when you Google it, put in the number 1 after it. So Driver 1.
It's not coming up with anything for me. Here we go. There. No, it's coming up with a game called Driver.
Yeah, Driver parentheses video game. Wikipedia.
Yeah,
single player.
Oh, it's just called Driver.
Also known as Driver: You are the wheelman.
In North America.
I know the game.
That's right. Yes, in North America, because nobody else would ever say that ever.
You are the wheelman.
And it's actually weirdly, I've never looked into it. I hadn't really thought about it for a while until you mentioned this podcast and what we were going to be talking about and stuff, and I was like, oh right, and I immediately went back and I remembered a whole bunch of things about it, but also I've forgotten a lot of things about it as well too. So I'm gonna do my best here.
This is a good one.
One thing I can tell you though is it reminds me a lot of Wreckfest in terms of the speed and the cars. So there's a lot of big, heavy 70s and 80s American rear-wheel drive cars. They're not good cars. They're not even fast cars, but they're rear-wheel drive and Larry as all hell. The back end, it's on leaf springs or whatever, so the back end just does whatever it wants. And it takes place in, I thought I was right on this, but I did have to look it up. It takes place in multiple cities. It was, I believe, San Francisco, Miami, Los Angeles, and New York. So you get 4 different backdrops for you, basically. And you get a variety of cars. So I remember there was one car that was like sort of reminiscent of a Chevrolet Chevelle. There was like taxis and stuff like that, like old Buicks and that kind of stuff. Again, when you think of 70s and 80s rear wheel drive American cars, you're thinking of the right stuff in this game. And it was a lot of like challenges and storyline and stuff like that. And like, it was really, really blocky, and it was PS1. So if you're playing along at home and you're looking up and you're going, wow, this looks a lot worse than the other games I've looked up so far. That's why. It's because it's on the PS1, so it's really, really old.
Just to be clear, Justin, it's just, I think we just knew it as Driver over here in Europe, and there was like a Driver 2. There was a Driver 3, which was Drive 3 year. It had a weird 3.
Driver 3 year.
Yeah. So here's the question for you then, Justin. Did anyone ever pass the tutorial in the car park at the beginning? That, for me, was the hardest thing I've ever done in video games.
I did. Man. I remember spending hours at my friend Mike Baba's house. Mike Baba and I have not talked in decades. There's no way he's listening to this, so he will not mind that I am mentioning his name. But I was at Mike Baba's house in like 1999 or whatever, probably that summer of 1999, because I remember I was hyped about that game. This was one that I owned. I owned this game, and I think he did too as well. And yeah, I think it was like a sleepover situation. You know what I mean? Like I stayed over one Friday night or Saturday night, and we just played the hell out of that game and just absolutely beat it. And I don't remember. So I assume it's American based on the locations and the cars and everything like that. I'm assuming that it's American, but I don't know. It just lacks some of the. So I would say what it captures is the same thing that Wreckfest captures, which is it's not quite a sim, it's not quite arcade, it's somewhere in between. It's not really a racing game. I don't really remember going head to head a lot. I remember
there was a lot
very,
of
very single player.
There was a lot of missions where you had to follow someone, right?
It is single player.
Not get too close.
There's no split screen, and PS1 obviously there was no LAN or online or anything like that. So it's only single player. The first game, and I didn't really play Driver 2 and 3 all that much. I did play Driver San Francisco. And I actually brought it up in a conversation with you guys one time, but I thought it was Test Drive San Francisco because I was so discombobulated with games at the time. But Driver San Francisco was also kind of neat. Well. It was, yeah. You could like teleport from car to car as you were driving, which just made it just added an interesting mechanic to it. But staying on topic, Driver 1, I think that's a prime candidate for a remaster. I would drop $60 on that so fast.
Yeah, same. Have you played it, John? Or is it a bit too old? Or
I haven't played it, and thank goodness, Justin, you didn't rent this game, because imagine being stuck in a tutorial the whole time while you were renting it. That would not be good. Yeah. I do have a spanner to throw in the works, though. Now, the Driver series, I've heard of the Driver series. I looked this game up, and I recognize the cover. I recognize the follow-up games. So, what is it about this game, Justin, that for you makes it a hidden gem specifically?
It was like it was almost like the location and stuff, and just like the way it handled, and it's really tough to explain, but it was very different from anything. So obviously the dominant racing game title at the time for PS1 was Gran Turismo, which I played shortly after it came out, and I didn't even own a console. I actually got my parents to rent me a PS1 and Gran Turismo for my birthday one year.
Wow.
And that was my first experience with Gran Turismo. And then, I ended up getting a PS1 not that long after with Gran Turismo. Played the crap out of Gran Turismo 1, 2, 3, 4, all of the, I was very loyal. But Driver was so different because Gran Turismo was Japanese car heavy, being from Japan. Driver was American, and again, it was much slower. You never got up above like 85, 90 miles an hour, much like a 70s or 80s American car could do, if we're honest. They weren't like 120 mile an hour machines or anything. So, but yeah, it was just it was oversteery like Wreckfest as well, while being forgiving. So, you could drift in Gran Turismo, but you often had to pick the right setup, pick the right car, pick the right tires, adjust the tune, and then you could have a car that drifts in Gran Turismo. Driver was out of the box, ready to get sideways. And again, it felt like Wreckfest. It had that heavy sort of feel to it, but at the same time, it felt like the tires had no grip, which of course they wouldn't back then. The tires would have absolutely no grip at all, which is why the cars were locking up and skidding all the time. It wasn't because they were exceptionally powerful. It's just because the tires were terrible. So, but yeah, I think it just harkens back to a simpler time where it wasn't even, I don't even really remember races, but I remember like driving through narrow alleyways and, the boxes are going flying like it's a Hollywood movie. If you've ever... if you've ever seen Ronin or Blues Brothers or something like that, it's like that, the video game. You know what I mean? Like it's just so pure and simple, and it did have that really, really hard tutorial, but at the same time, it was fun to fail, I guess. I don't know. But again, but basically it just, it wasn't a game that required you to beat the clock or to beat other people. Well, I guess you had to beat the clock, but the challenges and stuff like that, and just the loose nature of it, the storyline, stuff like that, it was just so simple and pure. Again, it really reminds me of Wreckfest, actually, a lot. In a lot of ways.
It was mission-based stuff, wasn't it? It was,
I wonder if they're related.
On a track.
I haven't. Yeah.
No,
it was all open world in a city and stuff, which was great.
Yeah, which was really ahead of like Grand Theft Auto at the time. I think it was developed by Reflections in the UK of all places. And I'm actually going to pick you up on something here, Justin. I'm going to throw you off the podcast. No, I'm not. You see, the thing is, in Europe, that game was massively popular, so therefore it wasn't very hidden. But obviously in America...
well, it's forgotten about now.
Yeah,
especially the series,
yeah,
I would say. Yeah, completely forgotten about, completely abandoned. And it's
so
unfortunate as well.
Yeah, because, like you say, there were some dodgy ones in the middle of that series. The first two were great. There was the final one, Parallel Lines, was really good. As you mentioned there, like switching between the cars was really weird. And I think it's a big shame that it doesn't exist anymore. It's true.
Yeah.
All right, so... John Munro, take the stage. What's your final sort of main hidden gem for this particular episode?
Well, in the words of Rebecca Black, gotta have my bowl, gotta have cereal. Now, there is a game.
What is that?
I'll leave it at that, and that can... No. There is a game that... I don't know if you've ever played this, Tom, or heard of this, but you could get this game from buying a certain brand of cereal in your local supermarket. This was not a game you would just buy in the shops. This is a game that came as a disc within a cereal box. And I'm sure many people listening...
It's hidden because it's literally hidden inside the
It's
cereal
literally
box.
hidden inside of... I don't know if I can say the brand of cereal, but I think it'll become very clear in the name of the game, because the game is called Frosty's Grand Prix.
Oh my god.
Have you heard of this?
As in, they're great. I've not heard of this game at all.
Right.
I'm Googling it now.
Someone listening is going to know what I'm talking about. Someone is listening is going to know what I'm talking about.
I don't believe you there.
I cannot spell this out for you carefully because there's a lot of R's, but it's like Grand Prix. This game came in 4 parts, 4 discs, and was available if you buy a certain type of cereal, which it becomes apparent when you name the game. Right? You guys laugh. You guys laugh. Okay, laugh away.
Parts.
It came in 4 parts, so you had to buy 4 boxes of cereal and hope that they were the different parts, right? So like you could buy 4 boxes of cereal and you could get 4 of the same disc, but then you could trade them with your mate who also ate the same cereal, right? And the way it works is each part of the game would each disc, there was disc 1, disc 2, disc 3, disc 4. Each one would unlock a different amount of tracks that you could drive. Okay, so I should explain. This game is based on Formula 1. Okay, it uses the physics from Ubisoft's Monaco GP Racing Simulation 2, which is a game from 1998.
I'm interested now.
Yeah, this is no joke. This is a serious podcast and a very serious game. Right?
Okay. Sorry.
If you so they had the Formula 1 tracks from real life. So maybe disc 1 you'd have Albert Park, you would have Jerez, you would have Imola or whatever the tracks were, and then you'd unlock part 2, you would get Spa and Monaco and Manicure and all these places, okay? There was also game modes that you could unlock with more discs. So if you had 2 discs, you'd unlock the scenarios mode, which would give you certain scenarios. You would be racing in the rain with 8 laps to go, and you'd have to overtake 3 people on wet tires, or you had a puncture and you had to get it around to the end of the lap. It also had a career mode, which you could play. And it had classic tracks and classic cars, which you would unlock if you had all the games. So there was like a classic version of Spa, and you could race around there in like a 50s F1 car. Now, I am not joking you. This was an incredible game, right? The physics of this, back in the day, so this was 2003, I think. So it was a little bit, okay, it was, by this point, it was 5 years out of date, the physics engine, or 4 years out of date. But I'm telling you, this was one of the best games available at the time, and you had to just buy the cereal to get it. It was honestly so good. You could actually customize the driver names and the team names. So what would happen is you had a certain team that were like red, and I would always pretend they were Ferrari. So I would rename them the drivers of a certain season. So the cars looked like 97 F1 cars, 98 F1 cars, and I would put the Ferrari drivers from the 97, 98 season into the game. I would do the same for all these different teams. I think there was like 12 or 13 teams. And then what you could do is when you drive, you would have the real life F1 graphics from the late 90s. And you could basically recreate an entire F1 career in this game. Like genuinely, because you can change driver names. So as you move to the next season, you can, exactly. And then you can save your career modes and races, and you could even spectate AI races. So for me, this was like an alternate universe Formula One game where I could recreate an entire career of Formula One, all the teams, all the drivers, do my own driver changes, and this all came from a box of Kellogg's Frosties.
A box of cereal. Box of cereal. It's not even that expensive. And but you said it was 4 discs total?
4 discs, yeah. So say you had to buy.
Was it like? So did they release all 4 at the same time, and then you had to just keep buying cereal until you happened to get all 4?
Yeah,
or did they
there's
do
a 1 in
like
4 chance,
this
right?
month is?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
okay.
I think I don't quote me on this because I do not know the facts for this. I'd remember it as a kid, but I believe that they released all 4 discs, and then so you could start with disc 3. You know, that could be the first disc you owned, and I think I did start with disc 3.
Did you trade with people at school? So would you be like, "Hey, I got disc 2. You get a spare disc 2. You give me your disc 3." Okay.
I had a friend who wasn't even into car racing, and he had 2 of the discs I needed for the Frosties game. So we did some trading, and it built up the collection. You install them all one by one. But the reason honestly, for anyone that's played this game, I'm sure they can back me up on this. It may not hold up well now, but the physics of this game and the mechanics on a keyboard were as good as anything else back in the day. Like this was a high level game that had been rebranded to be in a cereal box, and I'm telling you, for the price of maybe 10 box of cereal, but you also get your money's worth because you get the cereal. So effectively it's free if you love cereal, if you know what I mean. This game was really high quality, customizable, hours and hours and hours of fun in my childhood. It even had a damage model, it had punctures.
Wow.
You could run over something, get a puncture, and you could see it, and you'd have to drive back with it. Pit stops, you could do full 100% races, everything. It was phenomenal.
So effectively, this is the first ever video game that's bad for your teeth.
Yes.
Oh, well, I've never heard of it, so that is truly, truly hidden. And also, it seems like the early days of loot boxes where you didn't know what version you were going to get. Can I ask, if you put in disc 3...
Loot cereal boxes.
Or did you have to have disc 1 for it to work? I don't know.
No. So, these are effectively 4 parts of the game that you can unlock. They happen to have numbers to make it easy.
Different tracks.
But yeah, exactly. So like
they're not sequential.
I started with disc 3.
Gotcha.
No, not sequential on the calendar. So I had disc 3, and it unlocked tracks like 2, 7, 9, and 12, or whatever they were. They might have been Monza, Silverstone.
Which was the best disc? You got to tell me one disc was the best that you played more than the others. Which was it?
No, because as you add to the collection, it just adds to the previous game. So for me, the best thing to unlock was the 4th disc because I thought I'd rinsed everything out of this game, and I spent like months hoping to get this disc.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So you add them together, and that creates the full calendar.
Gotcha.
So when you install the 4th disc, it unlocks 2 extra teams, so 2 new liveries, and it also unlocked the vintage classic modes. So for me, and the final tracks to be able to do a full season. So for me, like I think Albert Park was the first round of the season that year, and it got added with my final disc, and then I could do a proper F1 season. And I'm not joking you, this was phenomenal. Like, and we talk about them early loot boxing, and you have to buy all 4 discs, and it's luck which one you get. But it's basically it's a free object within another item. It's like getting a meal deal and getting a free toy with it. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And what you got was a video game that was stood up to any big full price video game. Phenomenal.
I guess they could do that now with like codes. Like they put the code inside the box to redeem, and then eventually you redeem enough codes to unlock all the content or something. It's not the worst idea now that I've understood how it works. Because you're right. Yeah, if you're going to be buying cereal anyway, you might as well buy the one that gives you access to the game that you want to play or whatever, or unlocks more content for that game or whatever.
Absolutely.
Not that bad actually.
That tops it. So we're not going to give awards, but you've won.
That should have been on our pricing strategy podcast as well too. We should have discussed it there.
The pricing strategy. How much cereal was?
You didn't need to tell me I'd won there, Tom, because I just knew it. This game cannot be beaten. This game cannot be beaten.
So listen, we've gone on a very, very long time here, and we've each covered a couple of games. But just quickly, before you jump in or say anything, Justin, did you have any other honourable mentions? Yes or no?
Yeah, so I picked a third one that popped into my head randomly.
All right,
Onrush.
so you've got another one to quickly talk about. Oh, all right, okay, fair enough.
Onrush.
And
Yep.
John, have you got some more that you were going to quickly mention? Yes or no?
A couple, yeah.
Okay, right. So you've each I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to tell me. Justin, you've only got one, so you have to talk about Onrush. And John, you've got 30 seconds to read off your list of honourable mentions. Is that okay? Because otherwise we could go on for 6 weeks. So I'm just going to get the timer ready. Are you ready? Okay, Justin, you're going to go first. Your time starts now.
I love the aesthetic of Onrush. Right away, when you see like the trailer and the pictures and all that kind of stuff, you can tell it's wild. It's crazy. It's got the characters and stuff like that. It's super cool. And also, it's not a racing game, technically. It's just a game where cars are going around and you're fighting each other. And it's so different from your traditional your racing game. The only reason I didn't play more of it was because it wasn't on PC.
4.
If it was on PC, I would have played it 200 hours.
Stop. Yeah, well done. That was good. And yes, that is a recent hidden gem. I would completely agree with you. So, fair play. Shame it was overlooked. That team did go on to make Dirt 5, so they're still employed, and now they're owned by EA, so we'll see what happens in the future. All right. John Munro, are you ready? Your time starts now.
Okay, Richard Burns Rally would have been an honourable mention, but I think it's been unearthed by everyone, so that no longer is a hidden gem. EA Formula 1 Manager from 2000 on PC, a great manager F1 game. You could sign drivers from other teams. It was all officially licensed. You could buy different engines. You could sign engineers. You could sign team owners, everything like that. It was incredible. Get Luca Bador and a Minardi up to the top of the grid. Final mention is a game that was mentioned earlier in this podcast, and that is Art of Rally. Now, I think this is a future hidden gem. It depends if people actually see it and play it more, but genuinely, Art of Rally is such a fun arcade game. It's different to anything else, and I love it.
Right. Very well done. That was 3 games in the 30 seconds. Fair play. I agree with Art of Rally. I love it. It is hidden for now, but hopefully they make some console ports this year, and then it becomes unhidden. Then it just becomes a gem, I guess.
Unearthed.
Anyway.
Unearthed.
Right. So that's it for this week's Traxion podcast. Thanks for joining us. Thank you very much, Justin and John, for their suggestions. If you've got any other hidden gems, by all means, find us on social media. Search TraxionGG. Justin will tweet back if they're good ones or not. We're going to put, like I say, images of these games that we mentioned in the post on the Traxion.gg website. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, or follow or subscribe. It's free on your favourite podcast platform. And yes, I need a haircut. See you next week, and keep it pinned.
Great.
Oh.
Grand Prix. It's 3 R's, by the way. I looked it up.